once you realize that you're a victim of the system, then you can break out of it and have freedom. I can tell you why you're stuck, but it has nothing to do with how much revenue your business is doing. It has everything to do with who you know yourself to be or not know yourself to be. And if you can't step into an identity, then you get comparison physiology is the same as someone coming to attack you. It's the same as a bear in the woods. What if you just tried to become a better version of yourself where people would hang around you for longer?
In reality, these people that are jumping from program to program, they're not being their true self in any capacity. Why would their clients want to stick around?
A lot of times to help somebody more, you don't need to add another service. If you know your identity, by default, you won't compare yourself to other people. What is up, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Profitable Chiro Network with my beautiful wife, Heather.
Hello, did you forget my name?
So I don't have to edit that out.
No way, dude. You should have just kept it in. It was really funny.
You just leave it.
Yeah, you could just leave it. All right, so check this out. This is going to be a fun episode, but before we get into it, we're going to talk about comparison. I get really passionate about this, and the thing that I want to talk about that I haven't yet on the podcast is when people say they're not stressed out. And so many people are like, oh, I'm not stressed out. But stress can come from a whole bunch of places. And there's one for me that's been, I don't want to say sinister, but that's a word that's kind of coming to my mind right now. So I want to talk about comparison.
Okay.
And how comparison triggers a stress response. And before we get into it, I should also share the story that Heather was comparing herself to me before we started recording this episode, and sharing with the team that is here behind the scenes, Nadej and West, and that her IQ is higher than mine.
I mean, I outright demonstrated it was way better.
So Heather is triggering a stress response in her body as she speaks right now by comparing herself. No, I'm just kidding. That's actually not how it works. But
you got the stress response.
Yeah, maybe in some way. Honestly, it's probably true. So the reason that I like this episode and I like this topic is because I think that if you are a human, you will relate to it. If you're a business owner, you'll probably relate to it even more so. Mm-hmm. And it is a place to just prove, like, I don't want to say prove the point, but like if you say you're not stressed, that physically is impossible.
With every single person. Myself, yourself. It doesn't matter how clean you eat, how much you work out, mm-hmm. There are so many places where stress comes from in our lives that it is impossible to not have stress. And I've talked about this before, but I think it's so critical to understand that when you have stress, that affects your thinking. And if it affects your thinking, it affects your thinking about yourself. And what this gets down to is identity and how you see yourself and how you see yourself and who God called you to be and what to do on earth. So like you can't see yourself in your true identity if you're stressed.
There's no possible way. But a lot of people that we sit and we work with, they'll tell me straight out, they're like, I'm not stressed. I have no stress. Like life is so good right now. And I'm like, it can be good, but on our wedding day, how did you feel?
Oh, I was so nervous.
Okay. Those are stress hormones.
Yeah.
Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. So nervousness, most beautiful day, happiest day of our lives, getting married, stress hormones. Mm-hmm. Same with me. Mm-hmm. I saw you walking down the aisle, stress hormones. My heart is pounding. My hands are so cold and clammy. Mm-hmm. I'm like, can barely hold the microphone to like do our vows.
Right.
And I'm like, my body's shaking.
Like everyone's staring at you.
Stress hormones.
Yeah.
Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. So for someone to say they're not stressed, like stress is not a bad thing. And what stress means is pressure on the system, just pressure on the system. But the reason I started thinking about this is because something that I struggle a lot with is the fact that I have a tendency to want to compare myself to other people. And I think that social media does a really good job of triggering this in people.
For sure.
And that can affect dopamine. And we know you get tons of dopamine hits from using social media in general.
Yeah.
But specifically, I just brought it up because I started thinking about myself and like when people say, oh, I don't have stress, if they have a comparison game, and I've actually heard people in other programs say that, well, you should be comparing yourself to other people because that's how you grow. And what I realized, and when I heard that, I started thinking about the fact that you made the face, so I know what you're thinking, is like that actually triggers a stress response that will not allow you to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't make sense at all.
No. And so, but if you don't think, so this is the toxic piece of it, right? Is that if you compare yourself to other people, even just a little bit, then you're going to prevent the part of your brain that's responsible for growth from working in the first place because it triggers stress hormones. Just like our wedding day, just like if someone came in here to attack us, just like if someone cut me off in traffic, just like if my bank account ran out of money and I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills or how I was going to buy food. Like those are all stresses.
Right.
Comparing yourself to other people is a stress too. And I want to get into why and what happens in the brain and how that has to do with identity.
Okay.
In the first place.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, can you tell like a story for you specifically where you felt like you were comparing and it created that stress?
Yeah. So when I was prepping this, I was kind of thinking about like, all right, where have I felt this way? And I think this is probably the most real example I could give is, so, and maybe if you're listening, you don't know, but I've done a ton of programs, right? Like I've done Warrior Week, Game Changer. There's all kinds of other places where I've done like programs or been in masterminds, or you call it what you want, but I've just done a lot of stuff. And I realized that one of my biggest, I would say, downfalls is looking at like being in rooms where people are like, oh, I have $1 million practice. Oh, I'm doing this. I'm doing $350K a month in revenue. And I'm like, that doesn't even seem fathomable to do $350K a month. Or people who are doing $1 million in a week. Like this is just kind of the world of people that we're surrounded by a lot of times.
Right.
Big practices, big businesses, all different types of businesses, not just chiropractic. But for a long time, I truly would hear those things and it would just make me feel not worthy. And I'm like, dang, dude, like my business sucks. And then maybe I suck. And then how am I ever going to provide for Heather, or how are we ever going to buy our dream home in California, which is crazy to even think about in the first. There's all this stuff, but that all literally triggers a stress response in me. And what I've been thinking about, so, I might even see a post on social media where it's like, for the longest time, I'll give you another example of this, a really, really example. So I have a mentor, someone who I look up to, someone who's a little bit younger than me, totally different space, not in the chiropractic space.
Okay.
But in 2022, I wrote a book that was called Never Chase Another Patient Again.
Yes.
And it was all about how you don't need new clients.
Right.
That was the point. And I still talk about that quite a bit. But God very clearly said, don't publish that book. So I've seen people, I'd never seen this before, but people in other spaces in the last 6 months literally saying the exact same words: never chase another client again.
Right.
You don't need more new clients. And I've never heard anybody say that before.
Yeah.
So that in me, I see it on I see the ad on social media, and it's someone who I know well and like talk to, look up to on a weekly basis. And I see those and it triggers a stress response in me because I start comparing myself as like, well, why is it working for him, but it's not working for me?
Right.
Even though it's just running ads. So like, I don't even know if it's working for him. So I'm telling myself this false story, but it's triggering a stress response. And then that makes me worry. And my worry is that my business isn't big enough, or it's not doing well enough, or whatever. But what I've realized in thinking about that is that, and hopefully this is encouraging for anybody listening, is that when you do that, it literally puts you in a stress physiology, which allows you to be less successful.
Yeah. When you're talking about comparison, I think immediately about being a mom. I feel like when you're a parent, especially a mom, because I feel like women kind of like take on that role a little differently than some males do. And you start to see like how your child is going out in the world and how they like respond to things, and their language, their physical development, milestones, all those kind of things. And like as a mom, and you see friends or acquaintances or anybody random, and
your child is the same age, they're doing something completely different. Like, you start to compare, like, well, what am I doing as a mom or a parent that is not allowing my child to achieve such and such and such, you know, like, so that just like creates this negative spiral as a mom. I think, like, I could pretty much assume that most moms can relate to the comparison game, because you see on social media, as you mentioned, all these moms that live like this most magical motherhood life. And like, I specifically have been like, well, I don't necessarily love this stage of parenthood. So like, I'm supposed to be loving it. Why am I not loving it? And it creates a stress within me. Like, well, I'm supposed to love being a mom for my child at this age, and I'm not enjoying it at all. Like, what's wrong with me, kind of thing.
Which triggers a stress response. Yeah. And then the craziest part of it is it literally makes you a worse mom.
Yeah, because I am no longer within the identity that God gave me.
Mm-hmm. Which may or may not, like, yeah, so it's part of your identity is being a mom, but it's more than that.
Right.
Because, like, being a mom we could just say for the sake of conversation that it's a vocation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like, that's not someone's calling. There's more to it. It's like, what would you be doing inside of that with your kids? That would be the identity.
Yes.
So this is where it gets tricky, is because you have to understand what identity even is in the first place.
Okay.
And realizing that comparison literally stunts you from being the best version of yourself, whether it's mom, whether it's business owner, whether it's husband, whether it's daughter, like, it doesn't matter what role you get thrown into. Comparison messes you up. So when these people are like, oh, we should compare ourselves and we should like tell the truth and I'm like, yeah, I'm all for telling the truth, but comparison, based on what I understand about it and the physiology behind it, it's actually worse for us. For a select few people, it might be better, but this isn't like oh, you should just accept where you're at and like be content and not work hard and not do anything. But it's also the opposite of that. We talked about this before, is like the grind, right? Of like grinding it out. So what's interesting is like there's a pretty straightforward framework for what happens when we have a stress response. So I won't even say a stress response, but when we compare.
Okay.
And so the goal for the rest of this will be to go like, all right, what's that framework look like? Then what happens specifically in the brain? And then what's it look like to have a kingdom identity versus being in like worldly comparison? And we'll kind of talk about all that and hopefully tell some stories in there too. I do have a question for you though, before we get into it. Can you think of like a specific time when you felt like you compared, like you kind of talked generally about being a mom and like comparing yourself to other moms, or like taking Coco and using her as a comparison to like other kids?
Sure.
Can you think of like a specific moment when you felt that way? I can think of some for me, but.
Yeah. I can outright say that I thoroughly did not like the first 6 months of Coco's life. Like I don't want to use the word hate, but I like almost hated being a parent. Like everything about it was just so mentally taxing for me and emotionally draining that I was like, this, like literally, I don't want to be a mom. I had thoughts of like, what if I just left and I didn't have to deal with this, like that kind of thing. So like in my thought process, like most women that I've ever talked to, they're like, oh, the newborn stage is so magical. It's such a blessing. We love it, etc. All this kind of stuff. And I was literally like dying inside because I'm like, well, I'm supposed to be loving every moment of this right now. And I didn't. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I enjoyed the snuggles during the day, like, but I love my sleep and I wasn't getting any sleep. And I felt like it was just like tearing me up inside, not loving that stage when I was quote unquote supposed to as a mom.
Yeah. So you're like, I'm so glad you shared this because it brings me to the point that I didn't make and I should have. Is like when I was talking about people who had like $350K a month, like as cool as that sounds, some of the things that come with that, I would never want. Like never want. And so what's cool is even though it feels wrong,
I know other moms who, if I put them out there, I'm not talking about clients, I'm talking about friends, who I know for a fact have said, like, I thought being a mom was going to be the most amazing, magical thing. And they're like, I didn't really like love my baby at first.
Yeah, I've heard women talk about how they don't feel connected.
But there's a comparison thing where you see the other.
You're right.
And then you start feeling, well, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
But that triggers a stress response. And then you don't show up as you because your stress physiology is messing up the true you in the first place. So same thing with me. Well, what's wrong with me? Because my business isn't that big. But maybe God's like, that's not what I called you to do.
Yes.
Like, your ministry is different. Or maybe it's that you don't even have the prerequisite skills to handle something that big. And I'm not going to give it to you because then you'll just mess it all up.
Yeah, you're not ready for it.
And you'll burn it down in the first place, and that God doesn't want you to mess it up. So I don't know what the possibility is for like anybody listening, but I'm just saying that it's the comparison game is tricky because a lot of times what we're comparing to, one, we may not even want anyway, which is true. Like, I can literally, when I think about the people's practices that I compare myself to sometimes, even in this moment, I'm like, that is so stupid because that's not how I want to see people.
That's so funny you say that because I feel like I compare myself often as a parent that, oh, I should have 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids. We should have like a bigger family, but like, I don't think I really want that either. But like, I feel like I'm supposed to because everyone else around me has like multiple kids. So like, I feel like I'm comparing myself consistently with other families around like, well, maybe I should.
Yeah. And I think that is a good reminder that what is possible for people is freedom. Like, you have the freedom to choose whatever it is that you want to choose. Now, I would argue that with that freedom to choose, you should probably be obedient to what God is telling you. So
I've heard clearly.
Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. But I'm saying, like, there's a level to, I haven't even been called to play the game that most other people are playing. That's part of why this podcast exists, because nobody else talks about this stuff. And for me, I just want to empower more people, and I feel like it's what I've been called to do. And if it affects one person, that's amazing. And if it affects a lot of people, that's even cooler.
Do you feel like this might be too far ahead, but do you feel like once you figured out like what your true identity was, that you no longer played that comparison game?
I still don't think I know fully what my true identity is. I think I'm getting closer to it. But here's the thing about identity. Part of knowing your identity is knowing what you're not. And you can only kind of figure it out by trial and error. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I used to want the $1 million practice. And I used to want, and like, I won't say there's not a part of me that still doesn't want that, but it would just look different in the way that we did it. Right. So there's, and even if this is the other thing too, like everybody's like, well, 7-figure practice, see 500 visits a week. But would you want to see 500 visits a week and have $1 million practice if your profit margin was 10% or 5%? So it's like,
doesn't sound efficient.
Yeah. So some of the stuff, again, what we go back to is like what you're comparing yourself to and telling yourself the story that you're not good enough isn't even a true measure in the first place.
Like, do you know what the reality is on their end?
Yeah. Because your brain doesn't care about truth. It cares way more about safety. And that's what this gets back to, is like the physiology and what happens neurologically in the brain when we compare, because it's a killer. So again, the point, like kind of the thesis of the whole thing, is that you for sure have stress. Unless you figured out exactly what your identity is. And if someone says, oh, I'm a chiropractor, or I'm a coach, or I'm a consultant, or I'm a physical therapist, or whatever, that's not your identity. That's a vocation. That's what you do. It's not who you are. And so who you are should guide everything that you do.
Every decision that you make.
And there's ways to figure it out, but I'm not going to share all like that today. But I think we can get into pieces of it. But it starts with, I want to go back to the beginning and just go like, all right, what's the framework for how this works, right? So first thing that happens is we have to have a stimulus. So the stimulus would be, I'm scrolling and I see, like I shared with you, my mentor's ad that's literally using the same, and I'm not saying he copied me because this is not the case at all, but it just so happens that I was doing this stuff like 2 years ago. God told me to shut it down. And then I see somebody else super successful doing it. And there's a part of me that's comparing like, well, why didn't I do that? Or I should have listened. But God has me on a different. So I'm comparing myself to something that God very clearly told me don't do.
I just think about the fact that like maybe he called you to start that for somebody else, and then he wanted to pull you away once you were obedient with that into what you truly were called for him. And then he was able to put that into somebody else's like world. And then that's the reason why it's transcribing the way it is, because that was exactly who God was calling to do that task.
And it's triggering to me, and this is somebody not in the chiropractic space, by the way. So it triggers me because I start comparing myself like, oh, well, I should be doing that, but I'm not, and then that comparison. So that's a stimulus. So we're scrolling, we see the ad, we see the post, we see whatever it is. It could be you see somebody's car in real life. So you have this very real stimulus, right? Mm-hmm. But the brain interprets it as a threat. And we'll circle back to why the brain interprets that as a threat instead of something else in a minute. Then we have neural activation. So neural activation simply means that if the brain experiences that stimulus as a threat, we okay so far?
So comparison's always a threat.
Comparison is going to be a threat. I'll share with you why in a second. Or I guess I won't say always, because if you're better than somebody else and you're comparing yourself to them, then that's not going to be like you and the IQ thing when I was joking in the beginning. It's probably not triggering a stress response in you.
No way,
because you're like, oh yeah, I'm better.
Yeah.
I'm smarter than you. But for me, it like still, I'm saying in my head, oh, I need to go study more, which is triggering a thought that I'm not good enough where I'm at right now. Mm-hmm. And so I need to get better, which could be an okay thing. But it's also, if I tell myself that I'm not good, then that triggers stress response and a stress physiology.
Sure.
So first we have a stimulus. I see the ad, I see the post, I see the car, I see the whatever it is, and I start comparing myself, thinking I'm not good enough. Then we have neural activation. So this fires the amygdala, which is the threat, scary part of the brain. It's responsible for holding scary memories, and it basically starts the cascade of what would happen to our body to release stress hormones.
Yeah, you talked about the amygdala a little bit during our our memory episode, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the amygdala is like inseparable from fear. So what happens is the amygdala fires up, but the reason that the amygdala fires up because when we compare, there's a threat to our identity of who we are as a person, our worth as a person. Mm-hmm. There's a threat to our status or our safety. So when I say status, you can think of status as like worth.
Okay.
So we have a threat to us feeling worthy as human beings, or not worthy as human beings. And if that's threatening, then our brain, just like if a bear was going to attack us, starts to pull blood from the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, rational part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that can say, oh, we don't need to worry about those other things. Let's just focus on our lane.
Keeps you out of fear.
It keeps you out of fear. But if we have fear, it shuts down the part of the brain that's responsible for logic and rationality and truth seeking in the first place.
Okay.
And then eventually, over time, we get the whole prefrontal cortex that shuts down. And then that can lead to anxiety and anxiousness and worry and more doubt and then depression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have stimulus, we have neural activation. And then the last thing is literally the stress physiology. So this is going to be, one is going to be decrease in dopamine. So dopamine's interesting because if we decrease dopamine, then what used to feel fulfilling stops feeling fulfilling.
Which is why people need more food, or they need more drugs, or they need to scroll
more,
longer.
Yeah, or like my business, I thought my business was doing amazing. And then I get around other people and I start comparing myself, and now it's no longer good enough. This is the curse, like literally the curse of the chiropractor. Because what happens is chiros go like this. Well, that thing didn't work, but I want to get my practice like theirs, and it worked for them, so let me go chase that thing. But then, well, that didn't work for me, so let me go chase that other thing that this other person said worked for them. And it's all they're doing is comparing themselves in all these different places.
The forever self-help seeker.
Yep. And they're just moving the goalpost every time.
Right.
And a lot, like what I'm starting to realize, especially about on the business side, is that just enjoying where it's at and what you built and knowing that, no, this is exactly what I wanted is more important than trying to like seek the next thing. Because then, go ahead.
But they wouldn't really know that that's exactly what they wanted if they're not necessarily fulfilling their true identity at the same time. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. But the reason that they wouldn't know exactly what they wanted or what their true identity was is because they were comparing themselves in the first place, which weakened the part of the brain.
Cycle.
So it's a cycle. So that's this is the whole thing is like why when people say, oh, I'm not stressed, but I can't figure out why I'm stuck, is like, I can tell you why you're stuck. But it has nothing to do with how much revenue your business is doing. It has everything to do with who you know yourself to be or not know yourself to be. And if you can't step into an identity, then you get comparison physiology. And comparison physiology is the same as someone coming to attack you. It's the same as a bear in the woods. And then we release cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. We decrease dopamine. So things that used to be fulfilling stop becoming fulfilling or rewarding. So then we have to chase another thing and another high, which is like I said, it's the curse of every chiro.
Like the stats.
Yeah,
that's all they care
my
about.
number, my office visit numbers. I want to chase this. Oh, I hit my record that I said like I would be good, and now I want to move the goalposts again. Or what's even worse and more frustrating, in my opinion, is when I sit with chiros and I chat with them, or practitioners in general, and they're like, "Well, I need more new patients." So like I tried this reactivation thing, and that didn't work. And then I tried this marketing company, and that didn't work. And then I tried these Facebook ads, and then that didn't work. And I tried this other marketing company, and that didn't work. And my question always goes back to, well, what if you just tried to become like a better version of yourself where people would hang around you for longer?
Yeah.
In terms of literally just how often you're seeing someone.
Right.
Because like if you saw someone, this is just a simple example, just for the sake of, if we're going to talk about numbers just for a second, this is a business thing. If I had a patient that I saw for 10 visits, and that was the average. So the average person who came in my doors, they were going to see me for 10 visits and then leave. If I could get them to understand the long-term benefit of chiropractic just a little bit more and get them to stay for 12 visits instead of 10, that's a 20% increase in visits, but also in revenue.
Right.
Without going and finding anybody else. How do you do that? You become a better version of yourself who actually knows who you are and what your identity is.
The crazy part too is like, if we're talking about chiropractors, like I feel like you have to be pretty well called to become a chiropractor, because it is a profession that one, majority of the population doesn't understand, or two, the rest of the population just, it has like such a negative connotation with it. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree 100%.
So you have to be called to become a chiropractor. With that, I think so many people have this heart that they want to help people, right? And so they find this identity, quote unquote, that their identity is just to help people through chiropractic care. They don't truly understand what they were called to do within chiropractic space.
Yep.
And so they're jumping from program to program to program, which other chiropractors are also feeding into that weakness, because they understand that so many chiropractors are seeking more because they don't truly understand their identity within their vocational space.
Yeah.
And so it's just like jumping back and forth. Next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Well, they're marketing to me that I can get more new patients this way. Well, they're marketing to me that I can add another service and be this way. But in all reality, these people that are jumping from program to program to program, they're not being their true self in any capacity. So why would their clients want to stick around and be with them?
Yeah.
When they're not their authentic self.
Because it becomes really obvious to the client that or the patient, if that's what you call them, is like, it becomes very obvious that then, oh, well, they're just trying to figure out a way to make more money.
Yes. I'm just a number.
Yeah. But there's no obvious shift in like, they're literally just trying to like become a better version of themselves to help me more. So it's so differentiated, and like service, a lot of times to help somebody more, you don't need to add another service. or another service center.
Shout that from the rooftops.
More so what it comes down to, and I know there are people that would disagree with me, people who I'm friends with who would say like, you're stupid for even saying this live. But to me, the way that you could help somebody further is if you knew absolutely 100% who you are and like what lane you roll in versus what you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like I'll just give the example. Part of my, and I don't have this fully figured out yet, but I feel like if I look at my track record of, we can go before when I was in high school, like helping my friends, literally some of them graduate high school, go into undergrad, working in some of the more urban school districts and helping some of those kiddos realize their full potential.
Mm-hmm.
Then stepping into actually teaching and really being passionate about like every single kid has the same potential to be successful. We talked about the hidden curriculum on the first episode and breaking down the hidden curriculum and letting people realize that like once you realize that you're quote unquote a victim of the system, then you can break out of it and have freedom. And remind me to circle back to freedom in a second because it's going to parallel here in a second. But then I step into chiropractic. It's the same thing. All I want people to do is realize that like what God put in them is unstoppable. But what he put in everybody, like we have the same potential to heal. So that's on a chiropractic side. But what God put in each of us on an identity side is different. So I feel like part of my role is just to help people see the God-given potential within themselves. Some people are experts in helping people see the God-given potential that they have to have a child within the chiropractic space. They're chiros, but they're literally helping people with fertility.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not, fertility doctor isn't their identity. Their identity is literally showing people what is possible, what God put in their body in order to be able to reproduce. And so, like, if we talk about that's freedom, because then it doesn't matter what program you're in. It doesn't matter what office style you run. It doesn't matter how many office visits you have because you know that you're stepping into the very thing that you were called to do day after day after day after day.
It's good.
We good?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
You talked about the freedom thing.
I talked about the freedom thing. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because like freedom is an important piece of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where you feel so many people feel stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm stuck. I can't take a day off of my practice. I can't do that. Like that's not freedom.
Oh no.
And so if you have an identity that says, you know what, I'm about helping people find their God-given potential, that also includes my family, and I'm going to take a week off and go to the Bahamas, and if people talk trash about it, like fine.
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt my feelings.
Right. I think when you are in that freedom or in your true identity and you have that freedom, like you don't care about what other people think of you because you know where your identity lies.
Yep, 100%.
So that's automatically going to no longer create that stress within
Mm-hmm.
your system. Would you agree?
Yes. You're making me think of the difference between bravery and fearlessness.
Okay.
So if you know your identity, then by default, you won't compare yourself to other people. Because I can look at someone who's talking about never chase another client again,
Mm-hmm.
which was literally the title of my book, and be like, you know what? That's just not my lane.
Mm-hmm.
So like good for them. That's awesome. And then you're not in a stress physiology.
Right.
So then you can express more of what God called you to be because your cortex is firing well because it's not shut down by the cascade that I just shared with you, right? Stimulus, neural activation, stress physiology.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the idea in terms of like, if you don't know your identity, then you will compare yourself. Then that triggers the physiology, which means you will be stressed, which means you will make poor decisions, which means you won't be in your identity. And it's a cycle that way
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
That answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So we kind of already talked about some of this, but I feel like it's important to go into this place of what is like a kingdom identity versus a worldly comparison game. Because if we have an identity, then we won't compare. But if we don't have a true identity, and a lot of places are trying to feed us a false identity.
What do you mean by that?
Like, okay, for instance, for some people to say, I don't even know if this exists. So if it exists, I'm not trying to, I don't even know, whatever. I don't know. So like, let's say someone had they had like $1 million chiro mastermind is what they called it. And I'm just making this up. Okay. So I have no idea if this thing, it might really exist out there somewhere. If it does, I would love to know about it. But $1 million chiro mastermind. Okay. So if I say that's my identity is I'm $1 million chiro, then that's still just a vocation. And like like there's a bunch of labels that are just put on it. That's not true identity. So like I might join up in a program and identify with the thing, but it's not really true identity. And so then we're chasing something that's not within alignment of who, it could be a little bit, but not in alignment of who we fully are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it would be like this. Okay. If I use me as an example, as a chiro, okay, there's a bunch of different ways that you can practice. You can practice neurologically based. You can practice flying 7. You could practice PI. You could be high volume. You could be low volume.
There's like hundreds of techniques as well.
Hundreds of techniques. So a lot of people, if we ask them like, who are you? They're just going to tell you what they do.
Yeah.
But that's not an identity.
That includes like people outside of the chiropractic
This
space.
is everywhere.
Yeah, like
yeah.
I know so many people that just their identity is like, well, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and so and forth. Like that's what they create their identity in.
Yeah. So this, I like mentioned it. I don't think I ever fully finished the thought, but if we go back to this idea of like bravery versus fearlessness, right? So when we talk about identity, what's cool is identity creates fearlessness. So fearlessness meaning there is no fear. And if there is no fear, then what part of the brain am I operating in? The cortex.
Yeah, the frontal cortex.
If I have fear or comparison or uncertainty, bravery implies that there's a fear, but I do it anyway.
Oh.
So there's an upgraded way to live out of fearlessness, not just bravery. Like bravery is great. It's noble. It's awesome, whatever.
So what part of the brain is bravery then?
What part of the brain?
Yeah.
It would still be, so if you have a cortex that's strong enough, then it can
Still
it can
frontal.
override the fear and say, okay, I'm going to do this. This is why cold plunge is great. This is why
That's like bravery.
This is why David Goggins stuff works really well, is because we're like through stress, you can train your body to say like, yes, this hurts and I'm going to push through.
Okay.
Yes, this thing is scary, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Do you feel like you have to use like bravery techniques to get to fearlessness? Or is it more like if you are set in your God-given identity, fully trusting, then you are automatically in that fearlessness state?
If you're fully trusting and surrendered, you can't be brave. You will only be fearless.
Because you have like zero control.
And
would
you
say?
realize that.
Yeah.
And you don't care.
Yeah.
You're indifferent to it, which means you're accepting everything. And if we go into like, again, levels of energy, control, low level of energy,
Right.
higher level of energy, acceptance of what is. So you're literally ascending levels of energy by the very act of being in a level of bravery, which is lower than which would be accepting.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
So if you have a true God-given identity and you can understand it and figure it out and know what it is for yourself, then your physiology will surround itself by that, and you'll actually be influencing, like you'll be living more from a cortex state, if that makes sense. So kingdom identity versus worldly comparison. So I already said this, God gave us individual callings. So this is one of the most important reasons that I think comparison triggers stress response. Because as soon as I compare myself to anyone for anything, I'm putting myself in the category of God made us exactly the same, which he did not. He meant two practices to be the same. He meant for no two people to be the same, even twins. So there's this whole thing that
unique thumbprint.
It's a unique thumbprint, and all of us have it. So comparison, if you ask me, is actually rejecting God's natural design. Because that would imply that he created us the same and we should compare ourselves to each other.
His natural design for your life specifically.
For anyone's life, yeah exactly. Yeah. So then, and remember, Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then lastly, so kingdom identity, the prefrontal cortex is activated. Prefrontal cortex is fully on. That's where we get into this place of like complete surrender. I'm in control. We can shut down the
You're not in
amygdala.
control, right?
No, like I'm in control because I know my identity. I know who I am.
Misunderstood.
I don't need to control the situation.
Yes.
I'm in control because I know who I am,
Mm-hmm.
and I trust that he's greater than me, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're in the worldly comparison, we're going to be more reactive, and we're going to make worse decisions. And you see this all the time. Oh, I need more new patients. Like, no, you don't. Oh, I need more revenue. No, you don't. Maybe if that's your identity, but I don't think God's identity for anyone is in a number of office visits, is in a number of collections,
Right.
is in any of those things on the business side.
Right.
So your brain can't walk in fear and purpose at the same time is really what it gets down to. How are we doing so far?
Good. Yeah. I was just thinking about if you were really practicing in your true identity, like you would never have to worry about the new clients, for example, because God would be providing for those anyway, like because you are calling out the purpose that he asked you to do.
How many people do you, I mean, I'll give you a really good example of this. Nadej, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Like Forrest Frank.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of was Friday night.
So we go to this concert, Forrest Frank, Friday night. We took Coco as her first concert. It was freaking epic. It was so amazing.
So much fun.
So there's a point in the concert. Are you cool if I tell this story, or you want to tell it?
No, go ahead.
So there's a point in the concert when Forrest Frank, there's two stages. So there's like a front main stage, and then there was a little back like stage that was tiny with a piano on it. So halfway through the show, Forrest Frank goes to the back piano. You were not there, right? Did you hear about this? Okay, this is pretty cool. So hopefully you'll think it's cool. Probably mess up the parts of the story. But all right, so Forrest Frank goes to that backstage, and it's his piano, and he has a laptop back there. And he plays a song, and then he's like, hey, and he's talking to us about his journey of how he got to this place. And he said, he's like, I really didn't want to break through. He's like, I was trying to make pop music, secular. And he said that one day he was praying, and God was like, if you make this song, then like, just trust me, was basically the gist of it, right?
Yeah, I think he like talked too about he was coming up on a bunch of like resistance for things, like things that just didn't feel right, or like he was trying too hard.
Oh yeah, and he had offers.
Yeah.
And he's like, that just doesn't feel right, so we turned him down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he's like, and God gave me this song, and he said, release it. And so I went on, he did his thing, he made the song, he released it on Spotify, like song went crazy.
Blew up.
Viral. And then God gave him another song, and he did the same thing. And these are Christian songs.
Yes.
So in the beginning, he's like, I didn't want to be a Christian artist. But then he's like, if you do this, dude, like I'll follow through on my promise for you.
Right.
So released another song, viral, another song, viral. And then he realized like, oh my gosh, like my thing is to do Christian music.
Yeah.
And so in
but
a way
bring
that
it in a different way.
in a way that's never really been done before
Exactly.
that I've seen. So he's telling the story. And then what's cool is he starts like putting together, he basically lays out how he built out this one song. And I don't even know why I was telling this story in the first place.
Well, we were talking about like if you fall into your true identity, then like God will provide for you.
Yeah.
So like for the new clients, but God provided for him.
For him, yeah.
The people listening.
So yeah, and he's like, he does this whole thing. He puts together this song, and he shows us how he put together in Logic, and it was so cool. It's this just amazing moment of like 20 minutes that he's explaining this and like walking us through step by step how he put together this song.
Which
good day.
I found
Heather
so
thought
boring.
it was boring, and
I
I
am
thought it
not
was
that kind of
amazing.
person.
Because this is mid-concert, right?
Yeah.
But the cool part is like, okay, most people wouldn't do that in a concert.
No.
But dude had an identity where he's like, I don't care. I'm
Yeah.
going to talk about this because it's what God wanted me to do.
Right.
And
Because a lot of his music has like layers to it and like that vibey feel that most Christian artists are not producing the same way that he is.
Yep.
So I feel like that's one of the reasons why he wanted to share that.
yeah, 100%.
It's so unique.
And so he plays the song, and it was Good Day, and it was amazing, and the song's awesome. But it just showed, like, you look around the arena after that moment, for me anyway, and it's 11,000 people, sold out show. He had 10 shows after that, I think they're all already sold out, and like not just in California, all over.
Right.
So I'm like, dang, dude, this, like, somebody I had never really heard of goes from not nobody, and he had a different name that he rebranded because it was too similar to someone else's. He had another group that he was a part of.
With somebody else.
I think you told us about that, Surfaces. Was that you?
No.
Oh, okay, got it. Oh,
Jamie.
So anyway, I share that because it's like the dude had done music before,
right,
but he didn't blow up until he stepped into exactly what he was called to do.
Yes.
And so that's what's cool, is because when you are in your calling, like, you'll just be provided for. And I know this is so counterintuitive to everybody. It's like, build the practice and build it. Dude, you can build it super big, but I've seen people build it super big and it start to fall apart. And sometimes you will just be provided for when you have that identity and you know who you are, what you stand for. That will guide everything that you do, but you have to understand who you are first in order to get there.
Yeah. I would probably add that, like, just assuming so, I guess I don't know the truth, but like, for those that are building those practices up that have been torn down at some point, one, they probably weren't fully happy. And when you're in your true identity, you are fully content and happy and joyful, no matter the circumstances, and at peace with everything.
Yep.
And they probably, were just, like, as you said, like, comparing all along the way because they weren't following through with what they were supposed to.
Yeah. And this is, I feel like, kind of the cheat code. If you have the identity, you stop caring so much about what car you drive. I'm not saying you can't have a nice car,
sure,
or a nice house, or a nice practice, and it be busy and make lots of money. Like, that's not the point. The point is, though, are you doing it to, like, in this worldly comparison game, or is it, because sometimes God won't bless it, but he won't necessarily, like, take it away. But that's where people, I feel like, start to lose their sense of freedom in it. And so there's not an outright, like, oh, you just can't have that. I know people who have built massive businesses that are built on completely wrong foundation, but they still have it. It's not being taken away. But I see the wake of what it leaves sometimes with their generations.
Yes.
I see the wake of sometimes what it leaves in their marriages, or with the people, like, they surround themselves with and who they do business with. So it's not always necessarily like that person's just going to get smacked down and get taken away.
Right.
You could have a really successful, thriving business, lots of money, lots of people, whatever the thing is that you're using as your idol.
But there's some kind of, like, chaos.
There's probably chaos somewhere. It could be in your marriage. It could be physical body, like physical health, sickness. It could be mentally, like anxiety, depression, worry, whatever. It could be divorce. It could be infidelity. Like, there's all these other places it could show up. But when you're truly in alignment, then you have freedom and you have purpose. And I would personally rather have my purpose and be free than feel like I'm a slave to something and that I just have to do it because my identity is rooted in all these other things that actually don't matter and we can't even take with us in the first place.
Right.
So I guess, like, the last little bit that I wanted to talk about is why comparison, like, how it works in the brain, that comparison would trigger a stress response. And so, we talked about this, there's the stimulus, then there's the neural activation, and then there's the stress physiology. But the deeper reason that happens is because, and I mentioned this before, is that when we compare, if we live in if we were cavemen and women still, a big part of what would allow us to survive is us being accepted as part of the group. We don't want to be outcast from the group, because if I'm a hunter-gatherer, me on my own makes it very difficult versus if I'm with a group.
For, like, safety purposes.
For safety.
Yeah.
So again, this goes back to the way God created our brain, right? So when we have safety, then we can express passion and purpose. If we don't have safety, then we can't express passion and purpose. But when we compare, that becomes a threat to our identity, because the implied thought process is, oh, I don't fit in. Oh, I'm not worthy. Oh, I'm not good enough. And we start messing with the neurochemical oxytocin, which is responsible for connection to other people in the first place. And so from a brain perspective, this is how, like, why identity is so important.
Which could also lead to some of the reason why people don't want to spend time with them when they are in that state.
Why people leave.
Yeah.
Why does everybody just leave me?
Mm-hmm.
How come I can't maintain relationships? How come I'll build it and then it will burn down
Mm-hmm.
and I'll lose it all? And then there's just like constant chaos. It's because you aren't rooted in an identity. And if we feel like our identity is threatened because we're comparing ourselves, then we feel like we have a status drop. And this is just wired in the brain for safety protection, for being accepted, is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the big trick. Think about it. If Jesus died on the cross as us, we're already accepted, we're already loved. What more do we need to prove to anyone?
Mm.
We don't. But we get tricked by most of the other programs out there because nobody's teaching identity. They're teaching chase more in collections, chase more new numbers, chase more Facebook marketing thing, chase more how to hire a second associate or whatever it is, like the thing that will define you as a better chiro, when realistically you were never meant to be defined as a good chiro in the first place. Because really what you are is a good son or daughter.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much more and deeper
Mm-hmm.
purpose to it.
Exactly. You're literally less like yourself when you compare. What do you think?
I like it.
Anything else? Other questions?
Any like easy tactical things for people to take away?
Yeah. So the first thing, that's a great question. Tactically, first thing, if you're struggling with identity, I would just try to figure out what you're not. That's a really, really easy one. Just figure out, what am I not? Simple, but not easy. It takes time to do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we get programmed in a lot of places. So it's like a process of trying to figure out what our identity is, right? It's not you don't just wake up one day and like, oh, that's my identity. I'm just going to do that now. Because your identity, again, will guide what you do.
And it can change through seasons of life too, a little bit.
I think it changes a little bit, but I think more of what changes is the vehicle in which you do it through.
Yeah.
Like some people are just called here to be like connect other people. Mm-hmm. Some people are called here just to help people heal. Like there's a whole bunch of different reasons. And again, they're all unique and all different. So two people could be quote unquote healers,
Mm-hmm.
but have very different callings in like what they're doing. One person could be teaching how do you make more money. Other person could be teaching how do you make more money, but have a good identity while you do it and not mess it all up in the process. So that's the first thing, is really just figuring out who you're not. But I think more importantly than that would be like somebody who's a believer, I would encourage them to pray on the fact and ask God the question, like, God, what do you say I am? But before you go to that place of asking God, like, who do you say that I am? What do you say that I am? Telling God the truth about how you feel about yourself, if that makes sense. So, like, lay it out. God, like, I love you. I know that you made me perfectly, but honestly, I don't believe that I'm good enough to have a business like this, or that I'm not strong enough to have this relationship, or whatever this, like, I don't believe that I'm worthy, or I think that I'm like, whatever the thing is, you just tell God the truth. Mm-hmm. Part of being able to tell the truth is being in the cortex part of the brain in the first place. So when we tell the truth, not to a person, to our creator, you could do this to the universe too, if that's your thing. And then stop and pause and literally be like, but what do you say about me? And there will be words that come into your head, and I would encourage you to write those down and just marinate on them. And that's going to get you a step closer to your true identity. There's more than that, but those are the two big practical things you can do.
You can start with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. I feel like there was something else I was going to say, but I don't remember what it was. So yeah, I mean, what it comes back to is like, if we say that we're not stressed, but we have any sense of comparison at all, That is a stress in the system. And I think it's a big stressor that people don't think about. And I think that's why social media can be dangerous for kids, is because it starts to affect their identity and who they are, because they're just constantly comparing themselves to everybody else.
Well, yeah, as a kid, like, you really don't, you're finding out who you are.
Yep.
And the things that you like and don't like. And your frontal cortex is not developed fully, as you said in the last episode.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
they're just like so vulnerable.
Yep. And if you fear, if you worry, if you compare, you're less like yourself. There's like a perfect version of you that God made you to be. And I think that's our job, is to help people find it, help them express it.
Yes.
All right, family. We love you guys so much. This was fun.
Mm.
We'll do it again next week. See you guys.